Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
I'm fine.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes, I don't know.
Okay, well, I think more people are joining, so we'll go ahead and get started. But good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for this next installment of Historic New Harmony's virtual community conversations. Our goal here is to continue, even in these interesting times, to support our historic and New Harmony mission of fostering and learning progressive thought and inspiration through our programs and collections. We appreciate all of you for joining us today, locally and some internationally. My name's Paul Goodman. I'm the Experience Coordinator for Historic New Harmony, and I am also your host for today. The virtual conversation today that we're going to be having is a virtual tour of some of our famous and historic sites here in New Harmony. Some people might not be able to make it if they're overseas or due to current conditions. So we thought that it would be an idea to give you an idea of what we have here in New Harmony and give you a sense of maybe someday you can come and see it for yourself. If you have any questions today, there's a little tab at the bottom of your screen that has a chat button. You click that chat button and ask a question on there, and some of our moderators will let us know that we can answer it for you. We can pause the tour and you can answer it at any time. Also, if you can, please mute your microphone. If there's any background noise where you are, we ask that you just mute the microphone so that we don't have any interruptions on that. This conversation is actually going to be recorded and updated to our YouTube channel, USI YouTube channel, within the next couple days. An announcement will go out so that you can watch it again if you'd like. And if you haven't already, please be sure to sign up for the New Harmony newsletter in New Harmony. We'll be sending it out almost every month, updates on New Harmony, historic New Harmony, and other things coming up. We will go over that at the end there. And then also, just another reminder, just ask all the questions. You can ask any questions. We'd be happy to answer them. There's no stupid questions. You can ask anything you like. Now, as I wanted to say again, my name is Paul Goodman. I am the Experience Coordinator. We also have with us some wonderful tour guides that will be talking along with us as we go along the virtual tour. The first one would be Linda Warham. She's one of our tour guides here. Marlene Huffaker. She's also one of our tour guides, and Katie Nurnberg is here as well. Also, up and coming, we actually have two other ones coming up: the New Harmony Athenaeum Welcome Center Museum, an architectural icon. That'll be on July 30th. Also, a conversation with Indiana poet laureate Matthew Graham. That's on August 13th. And then also there will also be the link for the newsletter, and also if you would like to see our website as well. But now let me introduce our Assistant Director of Historic New Harmony, Dan Mason. Dan, would you like to say a few words?
Absolutely. First off, thank you all for your time this afternoon. I hope you enjoy this virtual community conversation. We had a blast pulling it together, and hopefully technology will be on our side. But like Paul said, we are working to continue to live into our mission at Historic New Harmony and continue to educate and prompt progressive thought and continue to inspire from this incredible place called New Harmony. and from the University of Southern Indiana. So, you know, with the current situation with COVID-19 and such, we want to make sure that we're continuing to get the good word out and giving people opportunity to experience New Harmony. So thank you again, and thank you to the speakers and my team, of course, that helped pull this together. So enjoy, please tell all of your friends. We'll say it a few times, but if you've never been to New Harmony, please let us know if we can help schedule a visit. My team and I are glad to help in any way, and come experience the sounds, the sights, the smells of this incredible town on top of the sights you're going to see in this video presentation. But thank you all for being with us this afternoon.
Well, great. Without further ado, we will start the film, the tour, and we'll pass it over to Linda, Marlene, and Katie.
Well, I'd first like to say that New Harmony was built on a grid, and the entrance to the Athenaeum that most people use looks right out to the Wabash River, and the Harmonists use that river to ship their products. And so when you walk into the entrance, which leads you into this amazing building, that people walk into it and wonder, why is this here? Who did it? Tell us the story. Now, we're not going to tell you the whole story because you need to come and be on a tour. So
Yes, not gonna be like
I thank the Lilly Endowment, because without that, we wouldn't have this building.
They could find stuff.
My interpretation is
Add another line
it's a
because
ship.
of that.
There are
Well,
gangways,
some Australia, but right.
there are spiral stairs going up. And to me, it's a ship that landed in New Harmony.
Richard Meyer designed it to have a lot of ship-like qualities. It's perched on the banks of the Wabash, like Linda said. Above the front door, there's a triangular prow of a ship. That's what it's meant to represent. The windows are curved as the Wabash River curves. There are just a lot of characteristics that are very nautical. And when you come, you'll see all of those things.
I think that one of the best characteristics of the Athenaeum is the floors, because they tend to squeak almost like as if you are on a ship. And if you come and see it and you hear it, you will hear it every time you step on that floor. It's quite an experience.
And Richard Meyer, the architect, was pulling from many different influences as the Athenaeum came together in his design and such. He had built private homes and such, but the Athenaeum was the antithesis of all of those pieces, and it truly became, well, it is the first white-walled museum. So when you go to a gallery, when you go to a museum, and you see the white walls and the clean floors and the open spaces, it began actually with the Athenaeum. And it's meant to be a welcome center. It's meant to be a museum. It is meant to be, I like to say, and you'll see it here in a moment, the ramps that shoot you down into New Harmony. It's meant to physically and spiritually guide you through this experience. Whether it's from the river into inspiration and straight into the history and the town itself. The Athenaeum is 40 years old now. We just celebrated the 40th anniversary of it. Had a grand celebration, and actually, because of that, we are in the midst of many different updates and repairs. An icon of modern architecture is not cheap to keep up and take good care of. And we do work with architects and firms from around the world to get information, to understand how we are to take care of this incredible piece, the preservation of it. And we do still email back and forth with Mr. Meyer asking questions about solar panels or things we might consider in the future. Thanks to the Ephraimson Family Fund, we actually just implemented new AV equipment in the theater. We have, if this means anything, 12,000 lumen laser projection and 7.1 surround. It truly is a great space that USI educators could use for a class. No better place to learn about design and architecture than in an icon, or for the community to come together, or a tour group to come together to learn more about something. So it truly is a special piece and one of my favorite buildings in our portfolio here in New Harmony.
So if we think about the model that you just saw a few minutes ago, on tour, we visit that model, and that way when we go out on tour, they've actually seen the streets that we're going to walk on and what was there before. So that's a real helpful visual aid.
You can see that from the Athenaeum going up, so Meyer designed it, again, first and foremost, as a welcome center, and it's meant to be explored internally and externally. That's why where we started off, you know, it's meant to almost feel like a ship. And so you would go up to the bow and you would explore the different decks, and that's what it's for. Now, I will say that, you know, safety standards between 1979 and 2020 have changed, because you can see a lot of pretty open spaces between the bars as you go to the top, and that's something that is being addressed. But overall, it's just spectacular sweeping views of the Harmonist Cemetery, the soon-to-be reopened bridge, fingers crossed, and of course the Wabash River itself.
Photographers love to go up on the roof to get that bird's eye view of New Harmony. And photographers love the interior of the building also. As the seasons change and the sun moves across the sky, you get wonderful light and shadows moving throughout the building.
So we've already moved to the double log cabin, which some people call the dog trot, because the animals could get under roof by going through the middle. This is a cabin that is used when we have our Heritage Artisan Days, and we have rope making in here, we have candle dipping in here. And if you peek and look at that wheel with all the candles on it, the Harmonists made 1,000 candles a day. So you can see that turned, and they would take one plate off and put it in the vat, put it back up, turn it again. Quite a production line for the Harmonist.
I especially like to take families with children into the double log cabin, because there are things there that can be touched, things that we can demonstrate, like the rope making. The kids can touch the candles. We can talk about the kinds of things that children would have done in the early 19th century out here on the frontier.
And this is not an original Harmonist cabin. It was actually built back in 1852. And the story behind it is that we thought that we had a cabin back in, that was built back in the 1700s. And we had a professor come down and take samples of the cabin, and we found out that it was actually built in 1852, but it's a great cabin to go through, like Marlene was saying, bring families in. The first room that we went into I've actually been sat in that room through Hardison days. And believe it or not, I was actually, it was almost like having air conditioning in there. How they built it and the way that they insulated it, that room stayed very cool. And so it's a really neat cabin to go into. I love taking all the visitors in there.
It's interesting, Katie, that you talk about cool, because that back porch in August is the coolest spot in New Harmony.
Right.
Now, I believe we have some members of the Colonial Dames of Indiana and maybe even around the country, and I welcome them to the call as well. This is actually a Colonial Dames property that we partner on, Historic New Harmony and Colonial Dames.
I'm going to let Marlene talk about this
Yeah.
garden.
Here's the garden. And thanks to a grant that was done quite some time ago, we have this year done a lot of work to recreate a garden that is, we hope, is very much like the Harmonists would have had. We've used historical records to do that. So we have vegetables that Harmonists might have grown. We have herbs, those that are culinary and medicinal. You can see that we've been doing some harvesting, and we have also included flowers, because the Harmonists would have had flowers. They were practical, but they appreciated beauty too. Rose, hollyhocks, all kinds of lovely and fragrant flowers. So again, it's something that very much like a Harmonist kitchen garden would have looked had you been here in the early 19th century.
An interesting fact, so this year we have a landscape architect from New Harmony named Kent Schutte, and several volunteers who have helped build out this garden to exact historic detail. And as they were going through it, through planting and preparing for all of this, Kent actually shared with me that there was a learning that the plants were intentional relative to timing. So one plant would grow, another one would be in the process of growing, the next one over is ready for harvest. And so everything was intentional, the row, the timing. You didn't start plants from starts, you started them from seed, so you could perfectly time things. And he was just amazed, and you can tell the end result has just been spectacular.
So we have two buildings on this property. One is the bake oven. It's a replica of a Harmonist bake oven. And then the other one is the barn. And I can remember several years ago watching a young man redo that whole barn by hand. So the barn is also for the cow and the well-ventilated privy. I'm not sure the technique, but it was the well-ventilated privy. Go ahead, Marlene.
Well, every Harmonist house had the same floor plan. They were the same dimensions, regardless of the size of the family who would live there. You always come in from the garden rather than the dusty or muddy street. We're looking into the kitchen right now. Harmonists brought glass for their windows and cast iron stoves for their heating and cooking that was done in the home. From the entryway, you go into a common room. We have a number of authenticated Harmonist pieces in here that were acquired from a collector back in Pennsylvania.
And Marlene, if everything works out, we're actually adding to that collection. One of our supporters created a beautiful endowment just for the purpose of purchasing Harmonist, authentic Harmonist antiquities. And so we're looking at more more pottery, more furniture and such. So fingers crossed there.
I'm just going to cut in real quick. For those of you who have joined us on our previous virtual conversations, our last one had a professor, Dr. Mike Strzeski, who is a professor of anthropology at the University of Southern Indiana. And he has done quite a few archaeological digs out here in New Harmony for us. And the pottery pieces you see on your screen now are ones that he found during an archaeological dig on this right behind the Lens House. So right behind the Lens House is where the original pottery kiln was for New Harmony. And in his archaeological dig, he actually found a pretty intact pottery kiln and found all of these pieces in that kiln. Now, if you guys would like to learn more about the work that he did, that virtual conversation is on our Historic New Harmony playlist on USI's YouTube page.
And Claire, before we go any farther, will Linda or Marlene or Katie, will you give a basic backstory to the Harmonist for anybody that doesn't know about the Harmonist, where they came from, things like that?
Linda.
Okay. Father Rapp was in Germany, and he was not happy with the state Lutheran religion. So he started to have meetings, and pretty soon he had hundreds of people meeting with him, and the church was not happy with him. So he did what a lot of people did for religious freedom. They crossed the ocean and they came to America. Well, Father Rapp and his Harmonists built 3 towns: Harmony, Pennsylvania, Harmony on the Wabash, which is us, and Harmony on the Wabash is 1814 to 1824. And then they went back to Pennsylvania and built a 3rd town. So our Harmonist experience is 10 years. During the whole Harmonist lifetime, they were waiting for Christ to come. And so they pretty much died out waiting for Christ to come because they were a celibate community. And the products that they made, the money that they accumulated was absolutely fantastic. But they were waiting for Christ to come. That was the whole deal. And then, of course, here they sold the town to Robert Owen. And I don't want to go any further because you need to come on tour. So we're going up to the 2nd floor of the Lens House, and it's very sparse. You know, the kids come in and they say, "Where's all the stuff?" Well, they didn't have lots of stuff. They had a trunk to put their personal items in. And when you're working from sunup to sundown, you don't need lots of stuff. So these were hardworking Germans waiting for Christ to come.
And they were communal.
Yes.
So when Linda mentions the trunk, that would have been your personal items, but everything else was owned by the Harmony Society. The house, even your clothes, your food. You didn't have to go out and earn that living for yourself. Everything was, the work was communal, and the dividends, the benefits to the members were all communally shared.
We just saw a corner of the house with brick in the wall, and that's one of the things the Harmonists did. They put brick in the wall, a softer, unfired brick for a firewall and insulation. So they insulated very well. The cathedral labyrinth that was done by Jane Owen, it's one of my favorite places to walk in New Harmony. And a lot of times I walk by it and I see a lot of different people inside meditating. One Saturday morning I walked by and there were probably 20 students, looked like high school students, walking the labyrinth and meditating. And all these parents are across the street And I said, what is going on here? And they said, it's a confirmation class. I said, okay, and just kept walking. They were doing their thing. In the summertime, you can walk it barefooted and wash your feet in the fountain. It is just like the labyrinth on the floor of the Chartres Cathedral outside of Paris.
This is owned and maintained by the Blaffer Foundation, and they actually just landscaped this as well this year. I think they planted over 20,000 liriope. So it's been completely reimagined with some new plants and foliage.
Would one of you mind talking a little bit about why we have the labyrinths in New Harmony and what they meant to the harmonists, please?
The Harmonist labyrinth is towards the south end of town. Well, it's a nod to the original labyrinth. Theirs would have been made of shrubs and espaliered trees. But the idea was that it was a meditation tool. It was sort of an object lesson that one walked the labyrinth to reach the center. The Harmonist labyrinth had a temple at the center with scriptures painted around the top of the interior. And the idea was that there would be many twists and turns on one's path to righteousness, but one persevered to reach the goal. And it was a prayer tool. It was something that they would have been encouraged to do. And labyrinths have been around since ancient Greek times.
So oftentimes I hear the tourists call these mazes. Why is it not a maze?
Well, if you think about a maze, think about the mouse that gets stuck trying to get out of the maze, where the labyrinth is a continuous circle. You don't get stuck. You just follow the path to the center and then back yourself out.
No dead ends in a labyrinth.
I think the one really interesting thing about these two cabins is the oculus that was done. We had, I think it was actually during the big labyrinth convention that the artist, Mr. Buchanan, I believe, turned this one cabin into an oculus, which is camera obscura. And if you go in there and close the door, the little hole in the wall or the little hole in the door, the sun shines in and everything across the street is upside down on the wall in front of you. So it's a really, really interesting building, and it's open all the time. You can go in and enjoy.
Works best on a bright sunny day.
Yes.
Claire, will you be able to pause the video for a second? We do have a question from Joseph. He's asking about the connection with the golden rain tree connection to New Harmony.
Okay.
Can you expand on that?
Yes. They used to call those gate trees, and probably because they were by the gate of the Harmonist Cemetery. But during the Owen period, when McClure, Robert Owen's business partner, when McClure was in Mexico, he sent golden rain tree seeds to Thomas Say, the naturalist, and they were planted all over New Harmony. We used to have a golden rain tree festival years ago. And June is the best time to come to see the golden rain trees in full bloom.
Thank you, Joseph, for your question.
Oh boy, the Harmonist Cemetery. I've just spent 3 weeks researching the Harmonist Cemetery and the stones that are on the outside of the wall, which are old Episcopal cemetery stones. The history of the cemetery is very convoluted, but when you get to the end of the line, it's the dimensions that are important. In 1874, the Harmonists came back. They were back in Pennsylvania. They came back to New Harmony They took the old Harmonist brick church and they built the wall around the cemetery. But the old Episcopal cemetery was at the east side of the Harmonist cemetery. And so they didn't want stones in their cemetery because equal in life, equal in death, the Harmonists did not have gravestones. So when they built the wall, they built it 19 feet back to the west and did not include the old Episcopal cemetery stones. But the actual dimension of the Harmonist cemetery includes 19 feet out east of the wall. That's the short story.
You notice those mounds, how uneven the ground is inside the cemetery. Those are the remnants of burial mounds of the woodland Indians who were here before the Harmonists arrived.
I have been a part of an archaeological dig that was focusing on those mounds. We never dug into them. We dug around the cemetery, and we did take LiDAR scans of the cemetery, and we did see objects underneath the ground. Could be graves, it could be things underneath the ground, but we also found shards of stone tools and pottery shards and things like that that show that these ancient peoples came to this area and were next to this river thousands of years ago. The woodland period is about 5,000 years ago.
And Claire mentioned it, but in our last virtual community conversation, the archaeologist that joined us, it was a learning for me that there are actually mounds all over town in people's backyards. He showed us a map of where they had found. Many of them obviously have eroded over the last 1,000 or so years. But it's New Harmony's history isn't, just this wonderful last 200 years. It goes back much, much further. People were drawn here for a reason.
So the granary is really a favorite tourist attraction. I know on tour so many times at the beginning, they say, we're going to the granary, right? And yes, normally we are. And it was originally five stories to hold grain and products to be shipped out. It was not a mill, it was more like a warehouse. And it was renovated after, many years. I think 99 is when it opened. And so it finally became the property of the Rapp Granary Owen Foundation. And many of the things on the floor that you're looking at right now has something to do with the building. That very front has seismic meters under it to measure earthquakes. And there was also a flywheel for the steam engine at one time. So many different things happened to this building after the Harmonists left. It's two-story today like it was during the Owen period.
So once in a while on PBS, they'll show a documentary about the restoration and the whole story about the granary. And it includes incredible interviews with Mrs. Owen and her husband and all the people involved. It's called Old Stones.
Old Stones, yes.
Yeah, so if you set your DVRs once in a while, you can catch it, but it's absolutely a fascinating journey to getting it to the state that it's in now.
You're looking at the wishing well for today, but cistern for the Harmonist.
So to the interpreters, why was this called the Old Fort?
Well, I think because during the Owen period, and they took some pictures, they called it the Old Fort / Granary. But Father Rapp was no dummy. He came in 1814, and 2 years before that, the Indians took the fort at Terre Haute, which is not very far from us. And so even though we had moved the Indians north and west, if you wanted a safe place, what better than a granary made of stone that has water and provisions? Now, people talk about those slits on the outside of the window. They're actually for ventilation, but there are some people that I cannot convince that they weren't for a rifle to shoot out of.
Now, one thing about the restoration of this building is that there are no nails in the structure of the building. It is done in the old style of how the harmonists would have done it, by pegs. When they were doing the restoration, they sent the builders back to, I believe, Germany to actually learn the old style of actually doing it. Now, these builders were used to building McDonald's and Walmarts and things like that, and they felt like this was kind of like a labor of love for them. So it is one of those, it's a building that is held up by the structures themselves, large beams and pegs.
I'd just like to touch on that for a second. He kind of mentioned it. You guys see this wooden beam. They're gorgeous. It's important to note that the weight of the building no longer sits on those stone walls. It actually all sits on this wooden beam structure.
Yes, and the harmonists, when they built the granary, they put the beams inside the wall. And by having the beams on the outside, it takes the weight.
And there was a fire at one point, and you can sort of see some notches at the base of the floor. And it has a black area there. That's actually old burnt wood from the fire. You can actually see the remnants of it. If you were to come on a tour, you could see it.
We just had a peek out the back window, so you can see David Dale Owen's laboratory just behind the granary.
Looking at his fourth and final laboratory from inside his third laboratory, because the two-level incarnation of the granary was his third laboratory. So a lot of his geological studies that took place from New Harmony would have been carried out within the granary.
So this must be community house number 2, and it was the second dormitory, and it housed 40 to 60 single people. It has one of the most amazing fireplaces. It looks like hopefully we're going to get turned right around to the fireplace, but it's very, very, very deep. And it's the only one in New Harmony like it. And our theory is that you could cook in it all night, hang pots from it, because there were a lot of people in this dormitory that needed to be fed. Here's the fireplace.
The Harmonists had dormitories because they had become celibate, and so not everyone was going to require a family house as they progressed along their journey waiting for the second coming of Christ. So the first floor rooms that we're in right now would have been common rooms for eating, socializing, music making, all kinds of things like that. And up on the upper floors were the places where people slept. They had men on one side of the building and women on the other side of the building.
And the dormitories were only built in New Harmony. They were not built in Harmony, and they were not built in Economy. And so community house number 2 is pretty special to me. It's one of my favorite places to go to take visitors because it's pretty unique.
This is another building where we actually have some harmonist furniture. The bench is harmonist, and the sundial that you see in this building was actually on Father Rapp's house. It burned, his house burned after he left, and somebody luckily saved the sundial for us.
As you walk through this building on tour, you get to see a chronology of New Harmony's communal history and beyond. And you can see that we're kind of moving into the Owen period. This building was used during the Owen period of communal life as a school building. But the Owens certainly, their educational system certainly didn't confine itself to a building. They saw the whole area as a classroom.
And who were the Owens, Marlene?
So Robert Owen was a cotton miller from New Lanark and a social reformer. His ideas were on education for everyone, and that he could change the world and draw people into changing the world and improving the world with his philosophies of equality and education. That's the nutshell version.
Now, Linda, what's so important about this right here?
You really want me to tell this story? Huh?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Katie's going, yes. Okay. And this is something that you never know what's going to happen on a tour and what people are going to say. So I had two gentlemen from Lyon, France on my tour. They visit some people in New Harmony a lot. They were the only two on my tour, and they looked at this board and they started laughing. Now, this drawing is one of Lesueur's drawings, and you can see we're having class, and we have a lady wearing pants, very unusual, 1829 to be wearing pants. And I said, "Are you laughing about her pants?" And they said, "No, we're laughing about what it says up above." They actually got a chair and moved it over to this board, got on the chair, and I said, "Well, what does it say?" I could tell it was French. And if we have French-speaking people on this virtual tour, I do not speak French, so I'll probably mutilate this. But they said the top part is talking about being big-headed, but the second line is GPT, and in French, je, pay, te. Say it fast, it means I farted. And I said, "No, it doesn't. It can't possibly mean that, because we have this scholar that comes here all the time that's French, and he's never said anything about it saying that." And I said, "Why wouldn't he tell me that?" And he said, they happen to know, believe it or not, they happen to know this person. And they said, because this person lives in France, he's married to a French woman, but he was born in the Netherlands. So this is young French class boys having fun. I said, okay. Now, I'd been working for 13 years and heard that story. Within 2 weeks, I had USI international students. They came in. I said, "Do we have a Frenchman?" This young student raised his hand and he said, "I'm French." And I said, "Do you understand what that says?" And he says, "Oh, yeah." Yeah. I said, "Well, then you tell him." And he said the same thing. So in 2 weeks, I hear about this where I hadn't heard it for 13 years. That's New Harmony karma. I can't explain it. So it's true. They're having fun in class, even during the Owen period.
What a great story. Speaking of stories, I've always heard that if you're going to see a ghost in New Harmony, you're likely to see one in Community House too.
Yes. Yes.
Now, Linda, you've had an experience with that, haven't you?
Well, I haven't seen one, but one of the local restaurants were setting up for an event, and they took pictures of their setup, and the next day they looked at their pictures and there was supposedly a ghost, and they sent it to me. So I have a lot of fun with that picture on tour. Whether you believe it or not, makes for a great story on tour. So Paul, you can talk about a lot of the artifacts in here, because that's another dig.
Yep, that was another dig that they did. They focused on the area behind the community house. They looked at the period, most of the artifacts that they found were from the period after the Owens, the golden age, the golden era. They found teeth, they found rat bones. They found all these different things because the community house number 2 had many different faces at that time. It was a dentist's office. It was a tea room. It was an apartment building, a hotel, all these different things. So there were multiple things going on it was using for New Harmony at that time.
So you're seeing the Dutch biscuits. That's another insulation for the harmonists. That took a board and beveled it or tapered it at each end and wrapped mud and straw around it and put it up, notched it right up in the beams, and then they plastered over it. Owens Corning rated it R11, which is equal to 3 inches of their fiberglass Pink Panther insulation.
I believe Indiana's standard is 18, I believe.
Yes, I think we're at 17 or 18.
17 or 18, so 11 is pretty good for insulation
Mhm.
of 1820s, basically.
And again, we have the brick walls and the sway braces for support.
Now, Claire, can you pause it right there? Now, if you look closely, you will see a peg there. That's how they did most of their joists. It was all through pegs. The only nails that they had in their buildings were in the floors mainly. The pegs that you see there are square. They did a square peg in a round hole. They would dry out the peg, and when they inserted into the hole, it would expand as moisture got in there. And that is one of the reasons why some of these walls haven't moved in, since 1822.
I had a student, probably eight-year-old, come into this building and he looked around. He said, "How did they do this? How did they build this back then?" And I said, "Have you seen pictures of the pyramids?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I don't know how they did those either." And he was happy with that answer. Go ahead, Marlene.
Lawrence Shale left his mark in New Harmony before the harmonists, or as the harmonists were leaving to go back to Pennsylvania. And he is among some of the people who eventually did leave the Harmony Society. They became dissatisfied when Christ didn't return according to their expectations. And there were people who did leave. They were unhappy with the celibacy. Lawrence Shale eventually married, had children, grandchildren. And interestingly, I wasn't the tour guide that day, but some of his descendants came to New Harmony doing some genealogical research and took the tour. And when they went through Community House number 2, it was pretty exciting to see the handwriting of their ancestor on the back of the stairs, the little prayer. Or as Linda likes to say, "Lord, go with us." Here we go again.
The print shop's awfully interesting because the Slaters were printers here for years. And what always fascinates people is we see uppercase and lowercase here. And so we use that term today. Uppercase letters are capital letters and lowercase letters are small letters. And they did lots of printing here. Actually, Thomas Say, I believe it was 6 or 7 volumes of the Shells of North America that were printed in New Harmony. The slab here is I would call it the first monument for Thomas Say, because when you look out the window of Community House number 2, you're looking at the back of the Rapp McClure Owen mansion, and there's a much taller monument today on Thomas Say's crypt. So this was the original one. And of course, you didn't throw anything away back then. They just brought it over, turned it over, and used it as a table.
Excuse me, you might want to mention who Thomas Say is for those that don't know.
He was the premier entomologist, insects, conchologists, shells. He was from the Academy of Natural Science in Philadelphia. He was the main man. Of course, I could say that about LeSueur too. So when you come to New Harmony, there's lots of people to learn about.
I would like to point out as well that Thomas Say discovered a firefly here in New Harmony in southern Indiana. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce the scientific name because I will butcher it and everyone will be very confused. But it's commonly called Thomas Say's firefly, And it recently, I believe in 2018, became Indiana's state insect.
A lot of the things that you read have been named here. For example, the Osage orange tree is something McCluria, so it's named after William McClure, who was Owen's business partner. I think people, when they come to see the Solomon Wolf House, they actually have to come inside to see the diorama, because it was a diorama done in the 70s, and you actually have to see it. It tells the story of New Harmony with a visual aid of a diorama and music that was actually done during the Harmonist time.
It's always a favorite on tour. People love that.
So this is all one grapevine, and
It's very, very, very old, but it is not Harmonist.
possibly a descendant. We like to think that it is a descendant. Yes.
One thing that is kind of interesting about the Wolf House is who the person who lived in there. Linda?
And it was Solomon Wolf, and having a last name of Wolf is kind of interesting because he was a shepherd of the community. Wolf, shepherd.
One of my other favorite stories is they said in the 60s and 70s, you were more likely to be hit by a moving house than a moving car. This isn't the original location of the house, but many of the buildings are in their original location.
Thrall's Opera House is really one of I can say that about most exhibits, but one of my favorite exhibits, because when Marlene was talking about the harmonists that came back, the Opera House went through so many different things after being a dormitory. And the one that stands out is the garage. And about 3 years ago, I had descendants of the Garrett family that came back to New Harmony. And they were the ones that had a garage in this building for 50 years. And they wanted a tour, but they wanted to start out at the Opera House. Well, we spent an hour and a half at the Opera House before we ever got out of the building to go on tour. But what was so nice about them is they brought inside pictures of the garage. And that was kind of special.
Later, Linda, Marlene, we do have a question about the harmonists. Did they only speak German?
Yes, there was one harmonist that spoke English, and that was Father Rapp's adopted son, Frederick. And he was kind of the lawyer of the community, but they were a German-speaking group.
Thank you.
I think maybe Gertrude, Father Rapp's granddaughter, might have learned English a little bit further on, but Frederick was the main man to speak.
I believe they also taught English in the schools to the children so that they could be better acquainted with English businessmen in the future.
Right.
Claire, can you tell folks about, can you pause it right there and tell us the lovely story about the backdrop?
So this backdrop is new. Let me see if there's a better shot. There we go. That's a better shot. This backdrop is new. It is actually on loan from Mike Linderman, who is the regional state director for the Indiana State Museum and Historic Sites. And this backdrop is from the late 1800s and came out of a civic theater in Evansville. So it is very, very historic. They took great care in making sure they hung it correctly. If you look closely, you can see all of the fold lines from where it was folded for quite a long period of time. But it really just gives this authenticity to the Opera House to have this beautiful background in there.
It almost looks like a Lesueur painting.
It does, doesn't it?
It's very appropriate for there.
Just to let everybody know, we might be going over a little bit past 2 o'clock. We still have 8 minutes, and we're enjoying the tour here. So just wanted to let everyone know it might go a little bit longer, but if you're welcome to jump out at any time. But if you would like to stay on, we'd happy to have you.
Well, I'm good because I'm glad you're getting to my final exhibit because I have a different Zoom meeting at 2 o'clock. But the Maximilian Bodmer exhibit is my favorite, and it took me to Germany twice. And I think what's so interesting is we are lucky to have the 81 color and black and white prints that was a volume set, and they're all over the world, but we actually have one here in New Harmony. If you pause for a second, maybe on that, go up a little, down a little bit where that picture is with the horse, back the other way. There. So right here, you can see Prince Maximilian and Karl Bodmer, and they are talking to the Indians, but they started in Boston and went all across the United States and back on a 2-year trek. They wrote about it, they did pictures, and it's such a wonderful visual aid that we have here in New Harmony. When I have people on tour, I can't get them out of the building. So it's always my last thing on tour in case we want to stay a little bit longer. But Prince Maximilian actually stopped here in New Harmony, and he ended up wintering here because he got sick. And one of the things that I saw in Germany at the palace where he lived was his New Harmony theater ticket. So that means the prince went to the theater while he was here. The New Harmony Thespian Society was having plays during the Owen period, and he attended the theater. So you can see the trek across North America and then back. And it's amazing what they did, because after they finished this, they got a studio in Paris. It took 7 years to do over 300 volumes of books. And Prince Max wrote about it and published it in French and German and English. So you have a pictorial view. We're getting right there is New Harmony with the Wabash in the background, and Maximilian's journal is at the top. You can see he drew a picture of Father Rapp, but Karl Bodmer, the artist that he hired, did the actual wonderful pictures that come out in the book. So he's a fantastic artist. And this is Charles Alexander Lesueur that came on the Boatload of Knowledge, and he was the ichthyologist, fish. We could spend all day in this exhibit.
Now, this is actually an exhibit that is not open to the public normally. So Historic New Harmony has tours at 1 o'clock each day that begin from the Athenaeum, and the interpreters or the tour guides will then take you into the exhibit. But the building is not unlocked or open to the public ever.
And it's interesting that there are people that show up that do say, can we go to this exhibit? Will that be on the tour? Will we be going to the Opera House? Because sometimes if you try to get to everything, you're here, you can't be here all day to do it. So there are lots of requests when people come.
And one quick point about the tours, we're working to make sure that they're as safe and as enjoyable as they can be. So you have our promise that we're going to work to make sure that the trams are cleaned down and there's distancing, and we're asking people to wear masks. So when you contemplate coming to Utopia, know that we're working to take safety of our guests and our employees very seriously.
At the end of this exhibit, we do have the French text, and there is a map that folds out of the books. What's interesting is there are actually 2 copies of the French text in New Harmony. One we have, and the other one is in the mansion. So in this little town, we actually have 2 copies of the text. And last year's discovery in our library was the English text.
One nice thing about this exhibit, as you go through, you can see that there's a timeline. You get a sense of where they were and when they were there. There are also maps on the wall that show exactly where they were. Maximilian had a real desire, right, Linda, to follow in Lewis and Clark's footsteps and see the western part of the U.S.
Yes.
and the tribes.
Matter of fact, they stopped in St. Louis where Clark was working in the Office of Indian Affairs. They actually had hand-copied maps from Lewis and Clark's expedition. So they followed it right up the fur trade.
And if we didn't have their record, we wouldn't know as much as we do about the native people and their customs, because with the Westward movement of the European Americans, the diseases really devastated the tribes within another decade or so, I think, after this journey. So it was a very important journey, and it's a beautiful exhibit.
Claire, can you go back for just a second?
And I'm going to leave you, Paul. I'm going
Okay.
to have to leave you. So Marlene and Claire and Katie, take over the last couple of stops.
Thank you, Linda. Just to go back to the right before this, a little bit before that, right there. If you look closely, down at the bottom picture of that last one, might have to wait here. That right there at the very bottom, it looks like it's a little bit different than what the Harmonists or Maximilian and Bodemer actually drew. And that is actually because one of the chiefs loved Bodemer's drawing so much that he actually traded with him supplies so that he could draw his own painting. So we actually have a print of what a chief would have had. He drew his own painting of him slaying another member of another tribe.
So 1830 house is Georgian architecture. It's a house that was built by 2 of Robert Owen's sons. So it's quite a contrast in living to the Harmonist homes that we have. Much more ornate, much more colorful.
Personally, I'm not a fan of that wallpaper.
I always feel like I've walked into an M.C. Escher drawing when I go into that entryway. Those are some of Lucy Say's illustrations that we just went by, the shells. Lucy was Thomas Say's wife, very talented lady in her own right. She taught in the Owen schools, and she was his illustrator for some of his published works. So Katie, if you want to jump in here.
Yeah, so as Marlene was saying, Robert Dale Owen and David Dale actually built the house, but they never lived in this house. They actually rented it to about 10 families. And so everyone always asked if they ever live in it, and they did not. This house, I always like the visitors because you really kind of get a feel of the type of house that, that was built. And also, if we did, are we going into the parlor? Did we already miss the parlor? Let's back it up a little bit if we can. There we go. So the parlor was originally thought to be the kitchen because there was some exposed wood in there. Marlene, you actually have a better story about the parlor than I do.
Well, yeah, we do think it was originally the kitchen because there were pegs up above in the ceiling or in the beams in the ceiling to probably dry herbs or meats or whatever. But I like the parlor because we talked about how utilitarian the Harmonist place was. This has the melodeon, the game on the table, artwork on the walls, an overstuffed sofa for relaxation, lots of light, just a very different concept of not just a place to sleep and eat, but a place to enjoy. China on the table, Scotch carpet on the floor. And this kitchen was added by the Owen brothers. So it's not part of the original construction, but in the time period that they owned the house, they added this and actually expanded the house. And as I recall, in the 10 years that they owned this property, they had 9 different tenants who occupied it at different times. So that's just, to me, that says a lot about what kind of transition this frontier was going through at that time. People coming to New Harmony, some may have bought a property and stayed because this is after the communal period. Some may have moved on westward. Some may have decided the frontier wasn't for them and went back east. We don't know, but it's amazing to me how many people occupied this house in that period of time.
This is one of my favorite places, is Church Park. And there we go. And that is, as you can see, that's a replica of the door promise that was on the original church. If you go into Church Park, if you go right before you go into it, make sure that you're looking around it and see the entire span of the park. It actually kind of duplicates where the original brick church was in New Harmony, and with the hedging. In the center that we're in right now, as the camera turns, there is a great sculpture right there, the fountain, by a wonderful artist. Oh, go ahead.
Don Gummer.
Gummer, yeah. And Dan, did you want to talk about that?
Actually, the view that so if you stop right there, so this is all about commitment, which there's a lovely story that this was on a part of a show at the Evansville Museum, and Mrs. Owen went and she met Mr. Gummer. Mr. Gummer is actress, I just lost her name.
Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep, thank you. Meryl Streep's husband. And they were at this wonderful show, and Mrs. Owen fell in love with this. It was perfect for the project, but it's actually an indoor sculpture. So Mrs. Owen had worked with Mr. Gummer, and it's now coated in this incredible many layers of resin, which gives us this beautiful patina. And you really have to see it and experience it when it's on. It's actually just been turned on in the last week. It was just restored last season, but it fits perfectly. Mrs. Owen knew exactly what she was doing, and we're honored to have it, and Mr. Gummer to be a part of New Harmony as well.
I have a great story about Don Gummer. I was actually working in the Athenaeum and the phone rang and I answered it, and there's this gentleman on the other line and he's like, does so-and-so still work there? And I said, no, they're not here anymore. And they're like, well, I want to talk about my fountain. And I'm like, pardon? And he goes, yeah, my relatives were down there and they said that my fountain wasn't working anymore and I need to talk to someone about that. And I put two and two together and I'm like, please hold. And I ran and found the other person I was working with. I'm like, you'll never believe who's on the phone right now. It's Don Gummer and I don't know what to say. And so it was great. He was so sweet and so nice, and we definitely got it corrected. But that's whenever I see that fountain, whenever I always think of that conversation with him.
That's awesome. Yes, it's a great piece, and he's a very, very nice man. Very talented, obviously.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, that is it for our virtual tour. Does anybody have any questions or final questions or comments they'd like to share or ask?
I just enjoyed it very much. I'm a native born 4 generations of New Harmony, so, but some of this I had not seen. I haven't seen the other exhibits of their trip out west. So next time I get there, I'll try to come and see it, hopefully. We plan to come in May. I always come back and go to the cemeteries and for our alumni banquet, but we didn't get to come this year because of the virus. So hopefully next year.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, with that, that will come to a close for our virtual conversation. If you want to check out, we have two new conversations coming up July 30th about the Athenaeum, delving into the architectural home as it is, and then the conversation with Matthew Graham, the Indiana poet laureate. And if you could follow us on our social media, we have a Facebook page, and we also have Twitter and Instagram, and then we also have the newsletter. And we just want to say thank you to everyone that came, and we hope to see you sometime here in New Harmony for an actual tour.